Hey everybody, I'm Jody Vance.
And I'm George-Affleck.
And it's time for...
And the 2030 Olympics will be held in Vancouver. UnSpun.
Is that your call?
I don't know. I mean, the Olympics are on. There's still this, but the movement's happening for the 2030. There's not a lot of competition. So I think there's a lot of Olympic stuff this week. So we can kind of put that aside. But I was trying to find something to open with to get us into Olympics. Because obviously it's about sports, but sports, you know.
I know you're not really the sporting guy, but I love the Olympics in particular because it is amateur athletes for the most part living this crazy dream. I feel for the people that come in fourth, even when that's their all-time personal best. But the looks on the faces, like I want to not want to watch. I want to not want to watch. Does that make sense? Because I don't want to support the Olympics in China. I don't like the nuclear reactor in the background of the ski jump. And the sludge. Oh, then off the industrial park we go. It's like, oh my God. Not that I have a problem with alternative energy sources. So if somebody wants to at me on that, just calm down. I'm just saying it looks toxic where our athletes are. And even in the freestyle moguls, many of the competitors wear white or off-white. Great, I'm getting all sporty here, George, but they wear white snow pants with colorful knees, so you can see their knees bouncing as they're doing the moguls. And then they flip, and the backs of them are soiled. Like, has anybody wiped a seat in China? My goodness,
there's no snow in China. There's no snow there. That's the shot, the pull-out shot. Yeah, whatever. If those are nuclear weapons that we're seeing, that's obviously an intimidation approach. That's what makes this so political and so why you're seeing the viewership crash. There's the politics. There's the anti-China movement because of COVID. And, there's just multiple. And then they don't have snow. It's we know what that's like in Vancouver because we had to ship it in our first week.
And then had so much we almost had to cancel the start of the Paralympics because it all came at once after.
Yeah, that's right.
I do want to point out though that the Olympics being that the opening ceremony was down 43% viewership. It's
almost as bad as the Golden Globes and the Oscars.
Yeah, well, the Golden Globes didn't even air this year.
That's right.
The Oscars are happening late, but the point with the Olympics, the fact that the IOC, that was such an incredible powerful organization since the beginning of television broadcast times, the Olympics were so powerful, and they're just not as much so now, and they're looking for a place to land, and we have the ability to use some of our venues and perhaps get some housing out of the deal. And I want to get to housing in a second, but let's go to Olympics of a different time. Yes. A different kind, because it's literal. Like, I give Candice Bergen, the interim Conservative leader, almost a perfect 10 on the acrobatics being done where her turnabout has come in on the convoy.
Yes, she today did an announcement saying, guys, go home, guys, or families and your children in the back of the cab. Obviously, when you talk about spin, and that's kind of our ongoing theme with the show, they must have done some polling, and I think there's been a lot of polling in the last couple of weeks in politics, locally, provincially, federally, in order for politicians to make decisions. But I would say that, let 90% of our country's vaccinated. If give or take a bit here or there. Generally, it's hard. You get the odd Kid Carson on a person on a rant in Canada. He just opportunistic. He
right, but I know that dude. Like, I know.
Yeah, this is for those people who are listening. He's on Z95 talk show host. He went on a rant. I would say some of it conspiratorial. And then I don't know if he got the boot before. I was trying to figure that out. Did he get his contract was up and it wasn't being renewed, so he went on a rant, or he went on a rant and got the boot? Some questions about that, but anyways, he's gone from Z95, but he went on a rant and he's trying to be the Joe Rogan of Canada. But I think that's we have the odd, and you've written columns about this, and the odd, and you and I even don't agree 100% on stuff, but we don't. It's like, okay, you got your way, I got my way. But it's been 2 years. We're exhausted. And I think that this trucking thing is part of it came from the exhaustion. Okay, can we just move on? And we are moving on. Give us a couple more weeks, truckers. We're going to be in that place where you'd like to be, as they are showing in other countries. But now it's become something bigger, and they don't even want to. And so Candice Bergen saying, okay, go home. That's a Conservative Party. There was an assumption that was their base. They lost their previous leader because of this issue, because he basically said the same thing, that this does not represent us. Now I guess they've done the polling showing we need to get a better balance here. This middle politics are key in Canada. You don't want to alienate that middle vote. That's why the Liberals keep winning. So it's interesting, and I think we'll see that they don't seem to be willing to go home. They don't seem to be even willing to discuss anything anymore. They seem to be completely painted themselves into a corner on this issue. The truckers.
And yeah, for sure. And I want to go back to the Kid Carson piece, because full disclosure, I consider him a friend of mine. I haven't talked to him in quite some time. And when I heard that 6 minutes, I was taken aback by a couple of things. First, the fake news sort of vibe that he threw at it, where he said that he's not allowed to say certain things. Well, let me tell you how, yes, at music radio, the jock is definitely told what the tone and the program is, and that the expectation is you're there not to unpack politics when you're in between hit songs. So yes, a jock at a rock radio or a radio station, really any music station, is going to be told what to do. But yes, to say that all media is then told what to do is just rhetoric that is unhelpful on a national level. And I hope if you're watching this, I highly doubt you are, but if you do, if somebody sends this to you, I plead with you to not help fire up attacks on those who are working diligently. Journalists, teachers, healthcare workers, scientists, all people now that the Joe Rogan experience are fueling people to hate. And that is broken when it comes to a democracy. And so that's what bothered me about, because I love Kid Carson when he was like, well, I guess I could just keep doing segments about curly fries or regular fries. Call now. I'm like, ouch. Yeah,
curly
regular
fries. Like,
but I want regular fries. I never want curly fries. And I want you to know that. But I'm not calling the news talk station to say that. But to go back to what you were saying about the whys and hows of the convoy, there are two different things happening here for me. And Kid was referencing, that mainstream media is not talking about how they're feeding the homeless and they're taking care of people and they're playing, road hockey. And it's like, no, they are talking about that while talking about the 24-hour horn honking and the trucker convoy people who have now been arrested for trying to light a fire in a lobby in a building where convoy protesters or blockaders or whatever you want to call them got into a standoff kerfuffle with the people who live in the building going, get out of here. Like it's escalating. Yeah. And to say that it's not, and that it's hugely peaceful, it's helping the citizens of Ottawa, it's not. It's also not helping the auto industry at the border. It's not helping trapping Canadian truckers that are trying to get their wares to Canada so that we don't have more of a supply chain problem. That's what those blockades at the borders are different than what the protest is in Ottawa. I think that they're two conversations that we should unspin here. So let's start with the Coots and at the Windsor-Detroit border bridge. Like that's like a quarter of the ground trade happens at that Windsor border. Like for that.
We're learning about our country, aren't we? I mean, we had our port issue, as you know, with the flooding in the fall. And we learned a lot about how powerful our port is in our country and how important it is for goods movement. And now we're learning about our most important land crossing for goods in this country. And it turns out it's down there in Ontario. And Coots, I've never heard of Coots before. Okay. Clearly an important border crossing. So yeah, it's interesting. What's interesting though, I want to bring this up because is the funding issue too with these truckers. And I heard I find there's a certain hypocrisy I've heard from some pundits on the left side of the spectrum who were very defensive when and denied that the nonprofits Jason Kenney went after the nonprofits for saying they were getting funding from Americans. That's a conspiracy. It doesn't happen. And there was all that stuff. those same people now are saying, oh, they're getting, all these guys are getting their money from America. They're getting all their money from America. I don't know which true or not, but I find it interesting that they're jumping to this theory that they're getting all this money from America when it comes to this issue. But when it came to their issue that was related to them, oh, no. That doesn't happen. It either happens or it doesn't happen. I don't know. It turns out that maybe Kenny was wrong, and they did some analysis and they found that it wasn't 100% true, the numbers. But, it's I just find it, the hypocrisy of that bugs me. That's kind of just a spin on the side. As far
No,
as
I
the
get that.
borders,
I want to acknowledge that. I think it's really important because the layperson like me doesn't know the facts on that. And it all comes back to, it depends on who you ask. Because some are like, all of that environmental money came from,
right,
people south of the border, whatever, la, 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 la. And the others are like, no, it did not. That is just trying to smear the blah, blah, blah. And it's like, probably somewhere in the center is true. I don't know for a fact one way or the other.
100%. And
but
same goes to truckers.
Right.
Yeah.
So the thing that hits me and what I think is an important unspun subject to cover for you and I is how we're very accustomed to having protests be that of the left or center left or far left. And now we're seeing some would say center right, right plus far right protest in this. So how one Justin Trudeau or mayor or premier or mayor or whomever police force handles these is going to set somewhat of a precedent moving forward. Because people are saying, well, if this was somebody else, it would have been over la 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 la. And it's like, would it though? Would it though?
I know it's a good question, because the most relevant example we have is the tent city in Vancouver. The decision by the park board and the city was to be somewhat passive about it, to let it kind of find a way around it through injunctions and through finding the housing, giving them what they want. So basically, you could argue that it's a kind of an extortion situation, and that's kind of what the truckers do. We won't leave until we get this. There's nothing. Everything's off the table, and there's nothing to talk about. We want this. Give it to us. And
it started with, we want no vaccine passport at the border, and it ended up now being all mandates of any kind must be lifted, or we're not leaving.
Take down the government. I've heard that now too.
Right, that one. So but that's such a peaceful protest move right there. Take down the government.
Oh yeah,
sure. We just had an election. You want to confirm what the government is by the majority of Canadians? There you go. But George, when you draw the analogy, and where you and I've talked so much about tent cities, it's ad nauseum. But while they did definitely hold that neighborhood hostage with that tent city in Vancouver, they didn't shut down the economy of a major city in Canada. And that is what's starting to happen in Ottawa. It is hitting the economy in such a way. And anytime that I've seen the Ottawa police chief speak, like he's just like, help. Like the police, there aren't enough police officers. And now with some RCMP sort of ad, I saw the chief inspector of the Alberta RCMP at the Coots border, and she was referencing sort of what the plan was, like, we're going to move these people over to this field, which we have deemed to be a safe and legal place to protest. And she kept sticking to that narrative. And the question was like, well, how are you going to do that? She goes, we're going to give them a deadline and they will need to move. And if they don't move by that deadline, we will start to ticket and tow. Okay, what happens if they don't? She goes, well, we're just going to focus on the messaging of moving to the safe place, because this is not safe. It is illegal in that it is not safe. And that's kind of what my column is this week, is I reiterated that Kimberly Brownlee, Professor Kimberly Brownlee from UBC, she's a philosophy professor, as well as the Canada Research Chair on Ethics and Philosophy. So very much coming from that, where does peaceful protest become civil disobedience? And I think it's pretty clear that we're seeing civil disobedience now in Ottawa, are we not?
Well, it's interesting because you have Justin Trudeau, and the last time we had a major crisis on a national level, really, was FLQ in the 60s when his dad was the prime minister. And it wasn't until there was the kidnapping and the death that then he brought in the War Measures Act, a very unique, unprecedented decision by a prime minister at that time who was considered quite far left. Now we have a son who's also considered far left. But the times have changed. Could you bring in a thing like the War Measures Act, or would you want to be harsh like that? Is it only when at the point where somebody dies? Even in Tent City in Vancouver, we talked about that. Well, what happens when people start dying? But that didn't even stop the passive nature of this hands-off approach to upholding the laws. And so there seems to be this new gray area in the legal community about what's legal and what's not legal. I don't get it. I mean, I think that it's the fear, political fear is what this is driven by. Politicians are afraid of getting ugly. And if you're in politics and you're afraid of things getting ugly, then you're probably not a very strong leader. I think you have to make tough decisions sometimes. I'm not saying that decision now needs to start, go in there, but you have to start showing some kind of tough leadership. And from, in this case, the prime minister, I think he is saying it's not, he's definitely talking in general terms about it.
Yeah.
But there's no deadlines. There's no end in sight, and it seems to be getting worse as it spreads now across Canada and potentially in the United States, because they're seeing how powerful this is, how effective these giant trucks can be in stopping an economy. And when you've got
disrupting,
you've got America, which is already on the edge of this madness, and these Trump supporters who are probably willing to do anything to disrupt the Biden government, you're going to start seeing something similar, because they now have a case study of how it works. So it's just that's why you got to move fast with this stuff. You can't it's like when we talk about the whole broken window concept that John Clarides and this whole localize it. If you don't deal with stuff right away, it festers, it gets worse and worse and worse, whether it's a pothole on a street or a protest. And I'm not saying you go in there and you crack, down and stuff like that, but you've got to deal with these things immediately.
Deal with the issues. But we can talk about
quickly as a politician.
But we can deal with that, even shifting from civil disobedience or protesting or personal rights in that regard, to the opioid crisis. The numbers that were just released by the chief coroner here are astounding and continue to be. 83% of the deaths in 2021 happened in private homes. 83%. Like, this is such a massive problem. Like you were just referencing, had it been addressed when fentanyl was first discovered in the drug supply, how many lives might we have avoided losing over this span of time? Like there are so many lessons, to your point, George, and you said that about every tent city. You're saying it about the broken windows, you're saying it about the graffiti, you're saying it about the housing issues. Like, let's talk about what's happening in Vancouver City Hall with regard to, we've talked about Kennedy-Stewart's new home, new-ish the program, the missing homes? Middle of housing, right? Right?
Or the tiny homes.
Wanting to do that. But then first it was the homes program, and then it became the tiny homes, right? So he's obviously it's election, it's campaign time.
It's and by the way, I just want to shout, Emile Scheffel said something on Twitter today. He's a former executive director of the BC Liberals. And I thought it was interesting. He said maybe because it relates to the opioid crisis, it relates to housing and homelessness, it relates to our stress related to the pandemic COVID. That we've been in, is that maybe we need to start thinking about mental health as a national crisis and a national campaign that the federal government needs to really focus on and fund. This is something that's underfunded. Mental health care is underfunded in this 100%. Country, as is housing, and on a national level. And we need to start thinking about this, because we have triple whammy there on mental health. Homelessness, opioid, and now a pandemic. We're all being hit by the pandemic. Mental health. The housing file in Vancouver. I mean, I think this, the tiny homes thing, and I see that the NPA.
Explain it first.
Sure. It's a little close to Home Depot. If you live in Vancouver, down on Terminal, they're going to put in 10 units, little teeny units.
10 units.
No kitchen, just basically a hut, a little house, teeny little squares, 200 square feet. It's a
2 people each.
Yeah, it's kind of a it's a case study, or it's a template for what they want in the future that could work. Now, it's interesting. So the NPA, only Melissa on council, Melissa de Genova, voted against it, and of course John Cooper, who's their mayoral candidate, said that he was in favor of her choice. There was another person voted against it, so 2 voted against it. The rest voted for this. It's costing the Vancouver taxpayers lot of money. But I think it's $8,000 a month per unit to pay for this. This is not within the mandate of the City of Vancouver. Like any housing thing, any development of housing was never something the City of Vancouver should do. But now we're spending $400 million on housing in Vancouver over, well, that was the spend for the 4 years. That wasn't spent before. This is borrowed money. This is money that would have been used for other infrastructure that's now being used for housing because the province and federal government have let us down. So, but the argument of these tiny houses is an interesting one, because I think we are also a city that came up with the safe injection concept. And we are the marijuana. You could argue we pushed hard on that, allowing all the marijuana shops to just go crazy, and then once they made it legal, they pulled back, and now they're kind of all gone. Vancouver kind of is innovative in that way. So you could argue that, look, if you're not going to do this province and federal, we got to show you that this can work, maybe or maybe not. But is that something the taxpayers should be paying for? I think in this instance, I think it could have been underwritten by the private sector. Let's partner together and put this together and show the federal and provincial government that we need more housing, even if it means this kind of housing, because we need to get these people who are struggling off the streets and get them the mental health care they need, the drug addiction care they need. And it's like, but it's become politics, and it's an election year, and immediately the press release went out from the mayor's office, misspelling, calling Jonathan Cooper. I mean, come on.
What was that all about? Like, I saw that back and forth between John Cooper and
they gave him the wrong name. Whoever wrote the press release obviously wasn't the mayor, and it was a quote.
How many people? How many?
42 or 3 or 8 or 60 communications staff.
Communications people.
They can't even get a name right. Actually, this would be his own internal mayor staff. But
right. So
I don't know. Bad.
When it comes to the testing of that, like, there's so many pieces of this that I feel like the wheels are spinning. The SRO problem didn't go away. It just fell off the top of the news cycle. It's still a problem. People trying to find just a place to safely hang their hat continues to be an incredibly difficult Rubik's Cube for anyone to really sort out. I don't know. For me, I don't know if 10 tiny houses that'll house 20 people for a maximum of 2 years is really going to do much.
I just want to remind people of some stats that I've brought up before, and I forget the exact number, but for the last 30 years, the federal government stopped underwriting the production or creation of housing that had been averaging around, I think it was 2,500 units per year across Canada. So 30 years of 2,500 per unit. That's, let's say even out to 60,000 units that have not been built in the last 30 years because the federal government pulled out of the housing. Didn't do a housing program. That's 60,000 units. How many homeless people are in Canada? About 60,000. It's very obvious on the housing side what's happened. Then, of course, what happened in the 90s was mental health care became, they changed the way we did it. We deinstitutionalized across the country.
Right.
Around
no
the
more warehousing.
No more warehousing, all that, the words that they used, one flew over the cuckoo nest, no more of that. But then there was no plan. So if you got these people who have no houses, who have mental health care issues, and they're on the street. Why did this happen?
And self-medicating in a tainted drug supply. It is a perfect storm of chaos, and nobody is really stepping in other than those who are advocating for safe supply and halting the punishment, the legal piece of being found to have used illicit drugs or have a personal supply of some sort. I remember when you and I were talking about, because it was before pot was legal, before the legalization of cannabis. Oh my God, it was going to be Armageddon. People were going to be driving off the left, right, and center. And, it didn't end everything. So, I mean, there needs to be, even if one mechanism can start it, if you can't solve the reasons why people are using, can we not at least get to a place where it works for the individual to find a supply that is not tainted with fentanyl? Like, can we just stop 6 people a day from dying? 6 people a day from dying. We're closing down economies. And when I say we, I mean Canada, because should reiterate that a week from now, depending on when you're watching this, we tape on Thursdays. Next Wednesday, the expectation is Dr. Bonnie Henry, our provincial health officer, will be making an announcement that lifts gently. I'm thinking you'll be able to have your wedding reception. You'll be able to have your friends over for dinner. You'll be able to, go out with your group of friends and mingle. You maybe even be able to go to a bar, who knows, but maybe not in the interior because they're still a little bit, it might be regional. So we've got a lot of things we're going to open up. It's going to be a gentler spring and a gentler summer. And reminder, we could be right back to where we were with the strictest of measures in the fall, depending on what comes then. Hopefully the next variant is lesser and we move into what happened in the 1918 pandemic with the Spanish flu, that it's always with us, but it just gets lesser. So we need to, obviously the lessons here, George, we talked about our hospitals being overwhelmed before the pandemic. Time to expand that, maybe allow people who are educated abroad to be acknowledged as doctors and nurses and healthcare workers who actually have the experience and education. Let's give them certification so they can do it here.
It's a question we need to ask ourselves. So why is our healthcare system so vulnerable to when this kind of thing happens? Why is that? What can we do? We could have another pandemic and won't be 100 years. It could be 5 years. We don't know. You can't predict this stuff. So you need to prepare for the worst. It's a basic concept. Prepare for the worst, hope for the best. And clearly this pandemic has proven that most of the Western industrialized countries were not prepared for the worst in their hospital systems and certainly their ICUs, and how to deal with all the people who had these other surgeries that people are dying because they can't get get their hospital. If you have a heart attack in a town and there's no ICU beds in a small town, you got to get transported to a place where you're lucky if you live. So we need to think about that in a bigger level. Will we? I don't know. Housing and homelessness. What has happened in the last, since I've been, I got out of politics.
Housing, homelessness, healthcare, childcare, teachers and education funding. And I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And never a shortage of fodder for our UnSpun podcast. That's for damn sure. We have now, 158 episodes into this podcast. Yeah. And we've regularly said, what if next week's a slow news week? Never happens. We always run out of time.
Could be us though. Would you like to rant?
It could be. We do like to get on our soapbox and talk about it. We also do that a little bit on Twitter, where you are definitely a must follow at George_Affleck, George_Affleck on Twitter. I'm at Jody Vance, Jody with a Y, at Jody Vance on Twitter. Of course, you listen to UnSpun podcast or watch it. You can make sure you get every episode by signing up for the Fin, which is the email newsletter that is done at the Orca.ca. It curates all of the news in British Columbia for you. And honestly, that is my resource. That is my morning resource. I don't know if you're the same as I know. I open up my email. It's always there as I wake up, and it's the first thing I hit, and I scan down. I love the way our editor-in-chief, McLean Kay, kind of sets things up with a little quip as to why I should read that link that takes me to the Vancouver Sun or to the Daily Hive or to Vancouver is Awesome.
Know that we both read his emails in our pajamas every morning. Does he know that? Well, it's probably true.
We're about to find out because he always watches UnSpun.
With my glasses like this.
So that's right. It'd be like, huh? Yeah. Huh? So, and we're trying to do, I think, what's really important here with how divisive everybody is feeling right now and how upset and angry and frazzled and at the end of the rope. Like, there is something to be said for being truly informed about what is actually happening and not buying into the rhetoric. And if you are finding all of your news on a Facebook thread with a bunch of mad people, you should probably look around a bit, swim around a bit, check in the Orca, the orca.ca. And if you like it, spread the word to your friends and family because it is a good resource. It is not fake
and of course,
news.
Home to your column and this podcast, ladies and gentlemen.
Ta-da.
Amongst other things.
UnSpun. Oh, yes, amongst other. Every now and then we make George write something.
Yeah. It's hard. It's hard.
It's not that hard.
I know. I might be starting another column. For Vancouver's Awesome, they're pressuring me to do something. I thought about writing a column and it would be entitled, If I Were Mayor. And every week, I'll go through what I would do. It's fantasy.
I love that.
That fantasy world that you all would live in.
You know what? I propose that become the last let's make it the last 5 minutes of the UnSpun podcast weekly. If I
and
were
then I could just get it transcribed and then I don't have to write it.
Exactly.
Yes. Maybe.
I want that. Okay. See you later, George.
Bye.